I want to preface this by saying that Audible is my favorite app. So my criticism is not about the value of Audible, uh, but rather the inconsistency and the fact that I seem to be punished for having a large library. Um, and I think we can just kind of go in and see, uh, so um, it's interesting that it doesn't say how many are in my library, uh, but my library is over 500 books. And when I joined Audible, it was in the clear understanding that if I was not happy with a book, if I started reading a book and in the first, hour, I wish I hadn't bought it, it was wonderful. I could return it, which really just means exchange it for another book. And why is that great? Well, if we look at this, for example, I've ordered these two books. I know relatively little about them. This was just yesterday. And, um, it's likely to be useful. Now, occasionally, I will return a book just because I bought 3 or 4 books and there's always one that I like better than one of them. So it's just sitting there for like 6 months or a year, and I never actually listened to it. I heard about it at one point. I thought I would, and so, as soon as I hear about a book, I just go on to Audible and buy it because that's my way of remembering it. And so, take this one here. I read this one. This turned out to be great. So I'm not going to read this one. I got what I needed from this. I got 2 of them as a filter. Now, listen to this, listen to this. I'm listening to this. It's reasonably good. I may return this. I'm still hanging on to this. Listen to this. Loved this. Loved this. Loved this. You get the idea. I guess we have to go to, well, anyway, you can see there's 20 or 37 pages at 20 each. We're well over 500 books. Now, Audible at one point, see, this is where Audible, I think, is flawed. They're not looking at percentages, and they also clearly aren't looking at, did I actually read the books that I'm returning? So I used to be able to, and this is a criticism of deterioration as well as punishing me for being one of Audible's better customers. I used to be able, if I didn't want to return like a book, I could just return it. And that was the promise at the beginning, and it used to work. But then Audible said, you're returning too many books. It didn't say that I was buying too many books, at 50 to 100 books a year. It said I was returning too many of them, which I think is a poor metric. But, I was returning less than 10% of the books. But that was a higher number than average, right? Because I was buying more. And so they said that you would only be able to return the books with a phone call, which is absurd, right? So their idea was that if I had to be bothered to call them, that then I wouldn't, return as many books. And So my response was to batch books. In other words, to once a year, I would go through the bother of calling them. So I just did that. But now they have a new policy. You can't return more than 3 per phone call. So I batched the return because they were flaking out on the first promise, which was that you can return any book if you're not satisfied. That's Audible's message. They're just not living up to it. And, obviously I'm not satisfied if I read an hour of a book and don't want to read the rest of it. And I think that generates value, for Audible. If after my 10% returns, I have a 600 book library, is Audible hurting? And if I try out a book that I'm not sure on, is the author hurting? Because, for a riskier book that I'm not sure I'd like, I just wouldn't buy it in the first place, right? If the policy is no returns. So, so despite numerous runarounds, Audible is basically committed to saying that I, as one of the better customers on Audible, cannot actually return the books that someone who just bought one book could do one return. Someone who bought 2 books could do 2 returns. But someone who buys 600 books can't do 60 returns. That's not intelligent. And so hopefully someone higher up in Audible will look into this dynamic of punishing Audible's better customers.